Couple things before we get started. First off, we have what do we want to wrap this whole thing in, right? What type of tag do we want to wrap the whole thing in? A header, right? It's our site header, right? Okay. Then over here we have a component, right? And it can be however you want, an H1, other sized header, paragraph. I mean, I'd suggest an H1, but it's up to you guys, right? And then what do we have over here? What are all these? Right?
Unordered list.
Right, with how many list items? 5 list items, okay, awesome. And it looks like it has a container around it, right? To keep it within some of the width of the screen. All right. Excuse me?
The whole header has a...
No, so if the in terms of like background color, like you could do the whole header and then just push it in with padding, but it's like you have a header is the whole bar going all the way across, right? So like if we gave it a border, bottom, right, you'd see it going all the way across, and then we use the container to then push the stuff within it. If we gave the header like a smaller width, then it would like the border would stop right here. Does that make sense? Because it wouldn't be the full width of the screen. No, I'm just saying if you imagine a border having like that border being there.
It would be at the top of the green section.
All right, there we go. Take it away.
You need the mic?
Yeah, you want it here. Forget about this thing. So, I mean, I'm using the word container. You can call it whatever you want. Just like when you see sites, right? And like yesterday we did one site where stuff went all the way to the width of the screen, right? The whole screen was full of, when we did the maker base, when we did the different sections, one was here and then the main section was in
Something
here, right?
cool.
So that didn't have a container
Very cool.
because it was the full width of the screen. When you see sites and there's white space or background to the sides, then they're containing all their text, within a certain width. Some people call it a wrapper. Some people call it a container. You can call it. You can give it a class or whatever you want. All right, go for it.
All right, sounds good. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started then. All right, so to start, I just called it treehouse, kind of just the generic, since it's theirs anyway. And then in the body, we have the, So we have just the nav bar. We can kind of declare this as an H1. Semantically, it makes sense for people who use Safari, Reader View. The H1 is always the first one that rests at the top. And then this right side's a nav. So the first one, we'll just do an H1. Oops, sorry, actually. We'll do the header first.
So you're setting up the header.
And then so we want to wrap it in a container because it doesn't go the entire width of the display. And then in here we have our H1 and where we have treehouse. And then in here we have our nav that has a UL that has...
So he's creating this nav. He's creating this nav, right, to give like semantic meaning to the, to like Google's readers, search engine readers, so that they know that this is like the navigation of the site. Can you zoom in a little bit on that?
Yeah.
And then this is just an image shortcut, right? This isn't, HTML per se until it pushes tab. This is just an image shortcut. So it goes in there. So we have 5 list items, each that are clickable.
Okay. Free trial. Free trial. Okay, so this is the list item, or these are the lists here that we have, and that pretty much concludes the entire HTML. That's really all that we need at that point. Yeah. Oh, right.
So once he links to the CSS, do name it treehouse and put it in the CSS for. So once he puts his style sheets in, then this is everything we have to do. That's all we have to do in HTML, right? It's all the markup we have.
Oh, well, never mind.
Got one created for you over there too, right?
Cool beans. All right, there we go.
All right, so now the rest of the work we're going to do is in the CSS file, right?
Yes.
And just to go ahead.
All right, so I'm not the kind of person that uses CSS resets. I know it's really useful to use, but for me personally, I just, I don't know. I guess that's just me. I should probably start using them, but I've never really used them in the past, so I kind of just do things the standard way.
Based on, with this topic, Julian, you just asked, now, it's a question thrown out there.
Sure.
And I asked Jessica here, why include the reset? Why or why not? Is it, for him it's not important, but for you, you mentioned it in class that we should have one.
So you have different, like, why are resets important? What do you say? Oh, just repeat the question. Yeah. All right. So, like, you have different browsers have different, like, default ways they interpret, like, sites, right? Yeah. So, like, the resets just to make sure that you're starting out all across the same exact default settings for all browsers. So for him, he goes in and he figures out, like, where they're different. Like, if you see in a second, he has, like, I can look at his code here, and he's putting in, putting in margins to be set to 0 and stuff. So he kind of does the resets in his own style. But for you guys, just so you don't have to, like, think about it as much, you just include the reset right there. Does that make sense?
Yep, for the most part, it's just to get, kind of clean slate across all browsers.
So you're starting on the same playing field.
Yeah.
And especially with this, since you don't have, we're just doing minimal markup, it's not going to come, it's not, you don't have as complex of a web page, we're just doing the header, it's not as big of a deal, right?
All right, so let me go ahead and open this up in the browser really quick, just so we can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. So this looks pretty good so far, aside from the serif font. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and start by taking that out. I know they use a sans serif font, but I really don't know the font that they're using. So for the font family, we're really not going to declare anything. We're just going to be using a generic sans serif font.
And remember what that asterisk does, right? Someone tell us what that asterisk is? It's all HTML, right? All elements.
Yep. And then the font weight is about 400. It's kind of semi-bold, but not too bold. 500? Okay. I have a product key if you need it. Okay, and then this is for my primary reset. So body, main, figure, li, and h1s.
So he's kind of creating his own reset here.
These all have a margin. Body has one of 8 pixels, main has one of about 15, figure has another one of about 15, li has the margin on the left side, actually on the top and bottom of about 15, and then the h1 is whatever it is. And so we kind of just want these at an even playing field.
So this is his version of his own reset. Okay.
Short. Font weight is how bold the font will appear on the screen. Yeah. And so coming back to this, now we kind of have our, looks not half bad. All right, so.
I don't want to waste time on this reset topic, but
Sure.
Julian, why do you do it that way? Why do you add more work when you can just add a reset file and not have to constantly be putting in CSS code into your CSS file?
For me, it's the sake of a round trip. I don't have to contact someone else's server to get this other CSS file because that CSS file may not even be there to begin with. If I had it locally and it ended up not actually being there, I wasted a round trip. But I mean, that's just in terms of performance, I guess. You really want a minimal amount of round trips. But for this, I mean, this is probably just as basic of a reset as I'm going to get. I'm really not too concerned of how my website looks across multiple browsers. A simple fix of margin and padding will pretty much do everything that you need it. I really don't need the text or the vertical line baseline that some resets have. Like things like that you won't really notice on a first glance. You'd have to really go in depth to see the reset happen. So I pretty much just do the margin and the padding, and it takes care of, for the most part at least.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, good question though, thanks. All right, So this next part, I'm just going to do the header. You really can't see the header, where the header lies, so I just threw a box shadow around it, and that's just my personal preference, was just 2 pixels around it, and then we're kind of using the CE pattern for the hex. And
What he's doing is just giving the header a border so he can see as he styles it where it's at.
you can't really see it here. Let me go ahead and darken it out.
Yeah, it's hard to see on this projector screen. Go ahead and put it like black so I can see it.
Okay. Yeah, let's just do black.
You
Right,
see
there we
it?
go.
The bottom here? Right.
The reason why I'm using a box shadow instead of a border is so that the outline will rest on the outside of the container. And it won't mess with the padding or the margins of the remaining containers below it. Even though this is the only container on the page, good programming practice. All right, so the next one is the container. And the container is pretty much just going to specify the width at this point. So we have a max width of, the whole thing is around 1020 pixels. And we want it centered to the page because divs are block elements. We're going to go margin 0 auto. Let me go ahead and zoom back in on this so you guys can see it better. And why I'm doing a max width is with floats, you can actually shrink the container, and the float to the far right can actually move back and forth. Since top left is the default, we actually don't even need to float the H1 here. We can just float the nav to the right. And I'll get to that in just a second. But as we can see here, we kind of have this rested container when I go into, here we go. And we can see the container is on the outside, 1020 pixels by 143. And then coming back to the CSS.
If you did the common 970, that's fine too. Just,
Yeah.
I said common, what we've been doing for the week.
Yeah.
Why max width and not just do margin?
It's a good question.
You mean,
Like why didn't you just take out the max width and do margin, I don't know, something, margin 10 pixels or something like that?
You could have done that either way, actually. It really doesn't matter. I think of it in terms of larger displays, then it might make a little bit more of a difference. For large displays, you really don't want just a long string of text going across the whole thing. I mean, having it in a container is perfectly fine. But I mean, you could use margin, you could use padding.
so it's for
yeah.
like what he's saying is like it's for styling purpose. So like if you just did margin, well, first off, you have to have some type of width container in there for the layout, right? So like if we just had margin 0 auto, then it would push it off to this. It would just push it to the center, and the floats would go. Wouldn't work with that. You want to keep it within a container, right? Does that make sense? So you want to have some type of width barrier.
For my width, I did a percentage. What's the pros and cons between actually doing?
So the percentage, is obviously more fluid and responsive, as you change the page because it's relative to the page, like the screen size. But like, say you have somebody with like a real high resolution, screen, like a large screen that's wide. You want to. The reason why they do the container and they specify a specific width, or at least a max width, is so that like when you have like a wide screen, like the view, the text doesn't go all the way to the edges. In other words, like it's not as easy on their eyes when they're like scrolling, looking like that. So you'll see like if you ever see like a screen with high resolution that's real wide, you'll see like the text still stays within the container, so it's easy on your eyes like viewing it. Does that make sense? Right? Because if like the text just went all the way across the screen and you're like trying to read it, you're like, well, that's not easy to read. Like moving your eyes and your neck.
It's the way that you control the margins.
It's the way that you control like how they view.
Yeah, you have to have quote unquote white space, although on a computer screen it doesn't have to be white.
Right.
It's easier to look at.
Yes, exactly.
And on top of that, like the guy in the back was saying, is you can actually specify percents for margins. So the 1020 pixels that I have here, I mean, if I did a perfectly good margin here and specified it to about, I don't know, 10% on each side, resizing it, it would maintain that 10% of the overall width. So margin having a margin on either side or specifying a width, it wouldn't really matter in this case. The only reason why I did the max width is because the width will then be adjustable when you shrink it below 1020 pixels. Yeah, exactly. No, I'm actually going to go ahead and take those out right now. First things first, actually, that is it. Okay, so for the, trying to get my bearing here. Okay, yeah. So we're going to go ahead and hop into the UL. Give me 1 second. Okay, yeah. So for this one, we're going to get rid of it using the list style. And it's kind of ironic, you can actually get rid of the bullets using text decoration as well. And I guess that's how I did it here. I did text decoration twice, but text decoration and list style none will actually have the same effect. It will get rid of the bullets either way. For the next thing, for the UL, because we do have that padding on the left side that we really don't want, and just to see that, it's this thing here on the left side. And
if you did the reset, you won't see that.
right. Getting rid of that, it puts everything on a single line. And I'm going to come back up here, and I'm actually going to do the nav, and the nav just floats right. And there we go. But as you can see, it actually broke out of the container that it was in. And not to worry, though, that's an easy fix. Actually, I didn't, in fact, use a clear on this. I just did the inline block. And because the H1 element is actually not floating, it's still within the header container. So something you can actually do with this is that we want to kill just two birds with one stone. You can separate selectors by a comma. So I can select every LI element as well as every H1 element. And I can just say these are all display inline block. And as we can see here, it's back up here in this container.
If you didn't do that, you would just float both of them.
And to see
That's
what,
the way we learned it earlier in the week.
and as I'm shrinking this down, you can see that this right side, this is exactly why I did the max width. It still can technically responsive to a certain degree, and then when it hits the 1020 pixels, it simply stops stretching it, and then it will just position it back to the very center of the screen again. I don't think actually in this case it mattered. Yeah, I'm just kind of used to inline block because H1 by default is a block element, and you want to maintain as much block property as you can. But in this case, yeah, you could just use inline if you wanted to. All right, and then for the next one.
The main benefit in keeping, well, first of all, if you didn't use inline block, you need to float this left, right? Which is fine. That's the way we learned it. With the inline block, it'll come into play here in a second with the padding. Now that we have that it's inline block, when he applies this padding here in a second, it'll adjust with the size of the header.
Yep, and I'll go ahead and do that right now. So we want the tap targets between these to be a little bit wider. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue on with the LI here. And I'm just going to give it a quick padding. And so these are going to be just between each of these elements here. So I don't really want the top and bottom. I just want kind of the left and right. And that'll give me a pretty nice, even spacing between each element here. And then now coming back to it, I guess it's all just kind of generic styling from here now. So the H1 is actually kind of too big on this. Theirs is considerably smaller. So what I can actually do is I'm just going to do an order of which they appear here in the DOM. So if it goes header, container, and then H1, then I can just stick my H1 here. And then I'll go ahead and say that the font size of this is about 24 pixels. You can use percents. Either way will work perfectly fine. 24, I just wanted to get a really good estimate here. So that looks to be about kind of the same size here. And then continuing on from here, I will apply some padding. So the padding is going to be on the top and the bottom. We're going to add some to the left, but we're going to omit the right side. So I'm just going to shorthand that. So we want 24 pixels on the top and bottom, just the actual size of the font. Because we already took the margin out of the H1, we can actually just use the padding now to specify the width of the container that it's in. Since H1 is still maintaining its block property, the padding will actually adjust the size of the container that it's still in. So this is for the top. The right, like I said, we're not going to have any padding. This is going to be the bottom. And then for the left, we just want 15 pixels. That way.
So go back to that real quick. We talked about this earlier in the week. When you do margin and padding, if you want to specify each side shorthand, it goes top, right, bottom, left. So it goes in a clockwise fashion. All right, so he's saying give the H1 a padding top 24 pixels, right, doesn't matter, 0, bottom 24 pixels, left 15 pixels.
Yep. And then the last thing here, the font is just a little bit heavier than the list, so I'm just going to go ahead and give it a font weight of just 600, a little bit higher than the first one. And with that, we have our semi-bold kind of font here. And all right, continuing on with that. So the unordered list here that we have is good, but because we're actually nesting list elements and anchor tags inside of it, in order to get the coloring, we'll actually have to apply the styling to the anchor tag itself. Anchors don't inherit color by default. So in doing that, we can actually just go back over here, and we can say that this doesn't have to be in any order. You could do LIA or you can do ULA. I'm just going to go ahead and do ULA. So this is going to grab any anchor tag, not in any specified depth of the container. So since it's only one depth away, we can pretty much just use this. However, I wouldn't be able to do this because this would mean that it's the next container child element in. So we just kind of want to generic any kind of anchor tag that's inside of a UL. And from here, we can specify the color. And this is going to be kind of a light gray. And then we also want to take out the text decoration.
Why isn't that included in your resets? Because I notice all the anchors, whenever I see them, they're without decoration.
When you use a reset,
I mean, but I never see it in the resets.
He's saying they're not in the resets.
Hmm.
I don't know, that's a good question.
Yeah, there are actually some pretty clever cases when you want to keep the text decoration, like when you hover over an element, you put the text decoration back in. I guess that's one way of why a reset wouldn't
So,
have it.
Hey, real quick, White, before you reload that page. If you wanted the header, see how this UL list, right, is kind of outside the flow of the page. It's overlapping the bottom border of the header section. So what can we do? This is just, he didn't do it this way, but this is just a quick thing. What can we do so that the header then pushes down and includes that in it? We can specify the height, or remember that clear fix we talked about? Overflow auto. Or overflow auto, yep.
What was that?
Overflow auto where?
You want the actual gray color? 0C 989E for the list elements.
What was that?
8C.
Okay. Awesome. So it's just a little lighter shade of gray there? Okay, cool. I'm assuming that's because I took out the inline block thing.
Yeah, okay, I can see that, yeah.
Yeah.
See that,
There we
Zach, you asked that question, why didn't you just do it inline? If you did it inline instead of inline block, when we do that padding, it has that, that vertical, like it can do the overlay things when you have an inline element. So the padding doesn't work when you have it just inline for the spacing. All right, so I mean, for the most part, he can adjust the padding on the right to push it down some, right, to make it be on the same level.
Mhm.
And then, yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay. All right, so we have the list padding, and then looks like all we need at this point is UL. Yeah. Okay. So it looks like this is actually 15 pixels in instead. There we go.
There we go, so nice like that. And then how would someone tell me how he would make that free trial green? What can we use? The last child, right?
Yep.
Someone in the audience, someone out there, walk us through the selector for that. Yep.
last child, and then A.
Perfect. So what this is reading is for the last list item in our unordered list, give its anchor tag this styling, right? Or its link this styling.
Yep. And actually, on top of that, the treehouse here and the free trial are the same color. And as I selected multiple here, as well as right here, we can do the exact same thing. So for this H1, we can actually go in, and we can say the color, and this is right off their website. The color that they have for this is like 5FCF80. Yeah. Okay. And here we go. We have our green treehouse and our green free trial.
Beautiful. We'll take a 5-minute break. Do we have any questions before we take that break? Yes, sir.
Did you put the CSS back up?
Yeah, I'm going to push it too, so you can. Yep. Take a 5-minute break.